In 1941, Poland declared war against Japan. In a strange twist, the Japanese government refused to accept the Polish declaration of war. Not only that, but the Japanese helped the Poles spy on Japan's ally, Germany, and cooperated with Polish intelligence throughout the war. Following are 20 things about that and other strange war facts from history. Number 20. The holdouts who lasted for years on barren Iwo Jima. Yamakage Kufuku and Matsudo Linsoki were two Japanese machine gunners assigned to defend Iwo Jima when the island was invaded by American forces in February 1945. Some of the fiercest and bloodiest combat of the Pacific War ensued. The defenders fought fanatically, almost to the last man. Out of a garrison of 21,000 Japanese, nearly 20,000 died before the island was declared secured. Kufuku and Linsoki were among the few Japanese who neither died fighting nor committed suicide, believing their government's propaganda that Americans tortured and killed prisoners. They were too afraid to surrender, so they went to ground literally. The former machine gunners hid during the day in the warren of tunnels that honeycombed the rocky island, and emerged at night to steal food and other necessaries from the American garrison supply and trash dumps. Through such means, Kufuku and Linoski managed to survive for a long time in a barren and inhospitable island bereft of vegetation and game. The American garrison's lack of interest in scouring Iwo Jima's hard landscape enabled the Japanese duo to go unnoticed for years. Number 19. American corporals pick up strange hitchhikers in Iwo Jima. The holdout of Yamakage Kufuku and Matsudo Linsoki lasted until January 6, 1949. That day, a pair of U.S. Air Force corporals in a jeep spotted two pedestrians in uniforms a few sizes too big, walking alongside a road. They took them for Chinese laborers, and although they spoke no English and were uncommunicative, the American airmen assumed they were hitchhiking to the island's main base, so they kindly gave them a lift and dropped them off in front of the garrison's headquarters building. From there, Kufuku and Linoski wandered around the base for hours. Eventually, a passing American sergeant thought there was something strange about the duo. He took a closer look, realized that they were Japanese, and took them in. After an initial interrogation, the duo took their captors to their hideout. There the Americans found a cave richly stocked with canned foods, flashlights, batteries, uniforms, boots and shoes and socks, and sundry goods that the pair had pilfered over the years. Number 18. A baseball icon at war. Yogi Berra, one of only 5 players to have ever won the American League MVP 3 times, was also an 18-time All-Star who won 10 World Series. More than any other player in MLB history, after his playing days were over, Berra went into coaching and managing. Between 1947 and 1981, he was a player, coach, or manager in every New York team that made it to the World Series. All in all, he appeared in 22 World Series and won 13 of them. Less known about Yogi Berra is that he took a break from baseball to fight in World War II. The Yankees signed Yogi Berra in 1942, but he interrupted his career to serve in the US Navy. He wound up as a gunner's mate aboard the USS Bayfield, an attack transport. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, Berra served on detached duty aboard a Navy rocket boat, lobbing missiles and firing machine guns at German positions on Omaha Beach. He was also sent to Utah Beach to support the GIs there. Berra's craft came under enemy fire, but luckily for him and for baseball, he escaped injury. Number 17. Yogi Berra shot down an airplane on D-Day. Unfortunately, it was American. 19-year-old Yogi Berra enjoyed D-Day. As he put it, being a young guy, you didn't think nothing of it until you got in it, and so we went off 300 yards off beach. We'd protect the troops. If they ran into any trouble, we would fire the rockets over. We had a lead boat that would fire one rocket. If it hits the beach, then everybody opens up. We could fire one rocket if we wanted to, or we could fire off 24 of them, 12 on each side. We stretched out 50 yards apart. And that was the invasion. Nothing happened to us. That's one good thing. Our boat could go anywhere, though we were pretty good. Flat bottom 36-footer. Yogi Berra's craft lingered off Normandy after D-Day, furnishing further support to the expanding Allied beachhead there. Luftwaffe could do little to disrupt the Allied effort, but what little it did was enough to make people jumpy. Naval vessels off the beachhead were instructed to fire on any airplane that flew below a certain height, so Berra and his crewmates shot down a plane that appeared suddenly below the clouds. Unfortunately, it turned out to be American. Fortunately for the pilot, he bailed out and was fished out of the water by Berra's boat. Number 16. A comedian in World War II's US Navy. Leonard Alfred Schneider, stage name Lenny Bruce, was an edgy stand-up comedian whose routines combined satire, politics, religion, sex, and vulgarity. Born in Menlo, New York to Jewish parents, Lenny lived a chaotic childhood after his parents divorced. Raised in the homes of various relatives after the divorce, he saw little of his father but was strongly influenced by his mother, a stage performer. He became a poster boy for freedom of speech after prosecutors persecuted him with obscenity charges, of which he was convicted in 1964. However, before his meteoric career, Lenny Bruce had turned serious after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and hurried to serve his country in World War II. Early in 1942, soon after America joined the war, 16-year-old Lenny lied about his age in order to enlist in the U.S. Navy. He was assigned to the light cruiser USS Brooklyn. Lenny saw combat in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, as the Brooklyn was tasked with convoy escort and fire support for amphibious landings. Number 15. Acting strange, which in World War II meant acting gay, to get out of the military. Lenny Bruce's combat experiences aboard the USS Brooklyn included the torch landings in North Africa, the invasion of Sicily, the Anzio landing, and Operation Dragoon, the Allied landings in southern France. However, as the war drew to a close, Lenny grew bored with the Navy, having lied to get in he lied to get out. A slapstick performance in which Lenny had dressed in drag had upset his officers, and got him thinking, so after 30 months of service, he checked into the Brooklyn's sick bay to report that he was feeling gay. In a handwritten letter, Lenny wrote that he had been normal when he joined the Navy, but then his shipmates gave him abnormal attention. Such attentions included feeling his body and kissing him, so much that after 15 months aboard ship, he became attracted to some of his comrades. The strange scheme worked. The medical officer reported to the captain that the by then 19-year-old Lenny was suppressing homosexual tendencies, but the desire and temptation were getting stronger. The Navy sent him for a psychiatric evaluation because he had a tremendous amount of homosexual drive. Number 14. BeforeMASH and Corporal Klinger, there was real-life Lenny Bruce. The U.S. Navy's psychiatric evaluation of Lenny Bruce noted that he was the kind of homosexual who could adjust to heterosexual relations if given the opportunity. However, the evaluators concluded that if he remained aboard a ship filled with men, Lenny would eventually give way to the performance of homosexual acts. The Brooklyn's captain agreed, and wrote that Lenny might give in to his gay urges at any moment. With an explosion of homosexuality that was potentially dangerous socially to his ship, he recommended that the young sailor should either be separated from the Navy, or be assigned to a shore installment with access to heterosexual relations. The Brooklyn's captain urged prompt action before Lenny engaged in scandalous action causing discredit to the ship in particular, and to the naval service in general. The Navy quickly gave Bruce a dishonorable discharge, but he successfully appealed to have it altered to a discharge under honorable conditions. For unsuitability to serve in the Navy, his ruse to get out of the Navy became the inspiration for TV's Corporal Klinger, the cross-dressing MASH character desperate to get kicked out of the U.S. Army for being gay. Number 13. Hitler's strange fixation on superweapons led to a gun that could hit London from Europe. Hitler had a strange obsession with superweapons. In May 1943, Albert Speer, the Reich Minister for Armaments and War Production, informed the Fuhrer of a new super gun capable of firing hundreds of rounds an hour over an extremely long distance. The weapon was given the appropriately villainous appellation of Vengeance Weapon 3. The weapon, whose name was shortened to the V3 cannon, was intended for London, which the Nazis hoped to destroy. The vast underground complex was dug in the Pas de Calais in northern France, across the narrowest stretch of the English Channel separating Nazi-occupied Europe from England. The underground V3 complex was to include over 165 kilometers of tunnels, dug by German workers and slave laborers. The tunnel network was to be linked to 5 inclined shafts, in which 25 huge gun tubes were to be laid, all aimed at central London, as designed. The V3s were to fire 10 explosive projectiles a minute, 600 rounds per hour, 24 hours a day, raining devastation down upon and wrecking London. As Winston Churchill later commented, if the Nazis had managed to pull it off, it would have been history's most destructive conventional attack ever launched against a city. Number 12. The Allies spotted the super gun's construction but did not know what it was. Luckily for London, they destroyed it anyhow. The Allies were completely in the dark about the V3 cannon program. Aerial reconnaissance flights did spot the strange new construction activity surrounding the Pas de Calais complex. However, analysts assumed that the photos depicted a potential launching base for the V2 rockets. V2s were worrisome in of themselves, as the site was subjected to frequent Allied bombing starting from late 1943 onwards. The raids seriously disrupted construction and forced the Germans to abandon parts of the V3 cannon complex. The remainder of the site was seriously damaged in July 1944 in a raid that used heavy ground-penetrating bombs, which burrowed deep beneath the surface before detonating. The underground explosions wrecked and collapsed the tunnel system and buried hundreds of workers and technicians. Construction was halted as the Allies advanced up the coast from Normandy to the Pas-de-Calais, and the abandoned V-3 complex fell to advancing Canadian troops in September 1944. It was only then that the Allies discovered just how big a threat the complex had actually posed, and just how lucky London had been to dodge that menace. Number 11. Falling out of an airplane without a parachute and surviving. Serving in a bomber during World War II was as dangerous a job as it got for the Western Allies fighting men in Europe, especially in the days before Allied fighters secured aerial supremacy, and bomber losses were horrific. In 1943, for example, some American 8th Air Force bomber groups recorded a 400% turnover in personnel just 3 months at the time. Bomber crews were tasked with a 25-mission tour of duty. However, most never made it past their 5th mission. Things were even more horrendous for British bomber crews. Out of a total of 125,000 aircrews who flew for the Royal Air Force's Bomber Command, over 55,000 were killed, a 44.4% death rate, another 8,400 were wounded in action, and nearly 10,000 were taken prisoner, for a total loss rate of 58%. However, amidst that carnage, there were some amazingly strange survival stories, such as those of airmen who somehow survived falling without a parachute from miles up in the air. Number 10. The strange survival of Flight Sergeant Nicholas Alcamod. A gallows humor joke often told by parachutists is that it is not the falling from high up that kills you. It is the sudden stop at the end that does you in. The preceding is a good rule of thumb, but like most rules it has some exceptions. One such was RAF Flight Sergeant Nicholas Stephen Alcamod, who on the night of March 24, 1944, was serving as a rear gunner in an Avro Lancaster heavy bomber. Alcamod's Lancaster, part of No. 115 Squadron RAF, was returning from a nighttime raid that had bombed Berlin when it was attacked by a Ju-88 night fighter. The attack set Alcamod's bomber aflame, and it began to spiral out of control. Unfortunately, his parachute was burned in the fire. With the flames licking towards him, Alcamod jumped out of the bomber, preferring to die impact rather than get burned to death. He fell 18,000 feet to the ground, but as seen below, by some strange twist of fate, he survived. Number 9. Falling 3 miles to the ground and living to tell the tale. Flight Sergeant Nicholas Alcamod should have died when he jumped without a parachute out of his burning bomber 3 miles above ground. However, somebody was watching out for him. Alcamod fell into a stand of pine trees, then onto soft snow covering the ground. Trees and snow broke and cushioned his fall. He discovered that he was alive, that he could move his arms and legs, that nothing was broken, and that the only injury he suffered was a strained leg. Alcamod was captured and the Gestapo interrogated him. They disbelieved his claims until they found and investigated his bomber's wreckage. He spent the rest of the war in a POW camp, where his survival story made him a celebrity. After the war, Alcamod made a living in the chemical industry, and was featured on Just Amazing, a British TV series about people who pulled off extraordinary feats of daring or survived against incredible odds. Strange as it sounds, others managed to survive, falling from even greater heights without a parachute. Number 8. Equally strange was the tale of Alan McGee, who fell 22,000 feet without a parachute and survived. Immediately after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Alan Eugene McGee joined the United States Army Air Forces. He was trained in aerial gunnery, became a B-17 ball turret gunner, and was sent to the 8th Air Force in Britain. He joined the crew of a flying fortress nicknamed Snap, Crackle, Pop that was part of the 303 Road Bomb Group's 360th Bomb Squadron. McGee's 7th mission, on January 3, 1943, was a daylight raid against Saint-Nazaire in France. It ended with him falling over 22,000 feet from his B-17, without a parachute. While bombing U-boat pens, Alan McGee's ball turret took a flak hit that made it inoperative. He got out of the turret, and discovered that the flak hit had also shredded his parachute. Before he had time to contemplate the implications, another flak hit destroyed the B-17's right wing, started an uncontrollable fire, and set the plane spinning towards Earth. While crawling towards the plane's front, McGee blacked out from lack of oxygen. Unconscious, he fell out of the burning bomber. As with the miraculously strange survival of Nicholas Alcamod, Alan McGee also lived to tell the tale. Number 7. Alan McGee's was not the highest fall without a parachute survived during World War II. Alan McGee plummeted for 4 miles without a parachute. he crashed through the glass roof of St. Nazaire's train station, which shattered and absorbed some of the impact, then slammed into the station's floor. He was injured but alive. McGee's fall left him a bloody mess. In addition to 28 shrapnel wounds that he had taken while still in his B-17, he sustained damage to his lung, kidney, nose, and had several broken bones, plus a nearly severed right arm. Nonetheless, he had miraculously survived. McGee spent the rest of the war in a POW camp, until he was liberated in 1945. In 1993, on the 50th anniversary of his fall, St. Nazaire erected a monument in honor of McGee and the crew of Snap Crackle Pop. As seen above, British airman Nicholas Alcamod survived a fall without a parachute from 18,000 feet, and American airman Alan McGee survived one from 22,000 feet. Soviet airman Ivan Mikhailovich Chisov topped both records by surviving a fall without a parachute from 23,000 feet. Number 6. The strange survival of Ivan Chisov, who fell 23,000 feet without a parachute, suffered serious injuries, then went back to fighting the Nazis 3 months later. In January 1942, Red Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Chisov was serving as a navigator in an Ilyushin Il-4 bomber. When it was jumped by German fighters, the bomber was wrecked and spun out of control, so Chisov bailed out at a height of 23,000 feet. He had a parachute, but fearing that the nearby German fighters would shoot him, he decided to refrain from opening it until he got close to the ground. However, lack of oxygen in the thin air so high up caused him to black out. Unconscious, he continued all the way down without deploying his parachute. Chisov plummeted 23,000 feet from his stricken Il-4 before hitting the ground at an estimated 120 to 150 miles per hour. Luckily, he hit the edge of a snowy ravine, whose snow absorbed and dissipated enough impact energy to keep him alive. Chisov bounced from the ravine's edge and slid and rolled, and plowed his way to the bottom. He suffered spinal injuries and a broken pelvis, but lived. Chisov underwent surgery and spent a month hospitalized in critical care. He was a tough Russian. However, in 3 months after his dramatic fall, Chisov was back in the air, flying more bombing missions against the Nazis. Number 5. The need to overcome German defenses at D-Day taxed Allied planners and weapons designers. In 1944, as the Western Allies geared up to invade France, the formidable German defenses on the landing beaches, and how to overcome them was front and center in the minds of planners and weapons designers. The British came up with an innovative, as it turned out farcically innovative, weapon to clear expected obstacles ahead of the D-Day landings, the Great Panjandrum. The strange device consisted of a large drum stuffed with a ton of explosives and affixed to rocket-propelled wheels. The idea was to ignite the rockets from a platform at sea, and the angled rockets affixed to the wheels would cause them to rotate rapidly. That rapid rotation would launch the contraption at targets and obstacles on shore, blowing them up and clearing the way for follow-on troops who would land hot on the Great Panjandrum's heels. That was how it was supposed to work in theory. In practice, the device turned out to be one of the most cartoonishly farcical weapons ever developed. Number 4. The strange Great Panjandrum. The Great Panjandrum was supposed to be developed in secrecy, in order to spring it as a surprise on the Germans. However, testing was conducted on a popular beach, so huge crowds gathered to gawk at the strange device. The design's flaws emerged at the first trial run in 1943. When the rockets were ignited and the device was launched, it made its way up the beach before rockets on one of the wheels malfunctioned, causing the Great Panjandrum to careen wildly off course. The problem persisted in additional trials. It was impossible to get the rockets on both sides to ignite simultaneously, or to keep firing simultaneously. After weeks of troubleshooting, the developers returned to the beach, this time with a third wheel affixed to the device to increase its stability. That test proved more embarrassing yet, as the device hurtled toward the beach, only to double back and turn back to sea towards the launching craft. In the meantime, some of the rockets had detached from the Great Panjandrum's wheels to launch themselves at the observers on the beach, whistling over their heads or exploding underwater nearby. Number 3. An innovative weapon straight out of Looney Tunes. The Great Panjandrum's designers returned to the drawing board to work out the bugs. When they figured that they finally had it under control, they conducted a final demonstration in front of a gathering of admirals and generals, as described in a BBC documentary. At first all went well. Panjandrum rolled into the sea and began to head for the shore. The brass hats watching through binoculars from the top of a pebble ridge. Then a clamp gave. First one, then 2 more rockets broke free. Panjandrum began to lurch ominously. It hit a line of small craters in the sand, and began to turn to starboard, careering towards Klementasky, who, viewing events through a telescopic lens, misjudged the distance, and continued filming. Hearing the approaching roar, he looked up from his viewfinder to see Panjandrum, shooting live rockets in all directions, heading straight for him. As he ran for his life, he glimpsed the assembled admirals and generals diving for cover behind the pebble ridge into barbed wire entanglements. Panjandrum was now heading back to the sea but crashed onto the sand, where it disintegrated in violent explosions, rockets tearing across the beach at great speed. Unsurprisingly, the project was immediately scrapped over safety concerns. Number 2. The most farcical battle in the history of warfare. Among all the strange events in the history of war, few are more strange than the Battle of Chisov, which took place in 1788. The battle, to the extent that it could be called that, was a farcical debacle in which an army killed up to 10,000 of its own ranks, routed itself, and scattered in panicked flight without an enemy present. It occurred during the Austro-Turkish War of 1787 to 1791, and was fought between an Austrian army of 100,000 and itself. Austria ruled a diverse multi-ethnic empire, and its army was correspondingly diverse and multi-ethnic. Units were drawn from various ethnic groups, most of whom could not understand each other's languages. During the night of September 21 to 22, 1788, Austrian hussars crossed a river to scout for the enemy. According to Webster's dictionary, the word hussar stems from the Hungarian huszár, which in turn originates from the medieval Serbian huszar, meaning brigand. They found no Turks but found some gypsies who sold them schnapps. Soon the hussars were uproariously drunk. Back in the camp, the Austrian commander grew worried by the hussars taking so long to return, so he sent some infantry across the river to check. It was the start of a farcical chain of events that would end in disaster. Number 1. The strange battle that was fought and lost without an enemy in sight. The infantry found the missing hussars and demanded a share of their schnapps. The hussars refused, resulting in a brawl that escalated into an exchange of gunfire. During the fight, an infantryman pranked the hussars by shouting, "Turks! Turks!" That caused the drunken hussars to flee in terror. However, they were accompanied in their panicked flight by many infantrymen, unaware that the alarm was a trick by a comrade. Across the river, the Austrian camp stirred uneasily at the sounds of distant gunfire and screams, when the panicked hussars and infantry neared the camp, shouting, "Turks! Turks!" They were challenged by sentries who shouted, "Halt! Halt!" That was misheard by non-German speaking soldiers as Allah! Allah! In the confusion, an artillery officer thought that the camp was under attack and ordered his cannons to open fire. As startled and confused soldiers woke up to the sounds of combat, some began firing wildly. Within minutes, the panic and wild firing spread had engulfed the camp. Soon, entire regiments were firing volleys at each other, before the entire army dissolved and scattered in panicked flight. The Turks arrived 2 days later and captured the Austrian camp, where they found 10,000 dead and wounded.